Caught in a frozen enemy camp, a group of American soldiers held on to a slim chance to break free. As night fell, they took a daring step into the unknown, risking everything for one shot at freedom. But would they make it out alive? In the bitter chill of late 1917, northern France had become a land scarred by months of unrelenting warfare. Trenches zigzagged through frozen fields, turning once quiet villages and farmland into a vast and grim network of mud, wire, and tension. Shellfire echoed in the distance day and night, a constant reminder that peace was nowhere in sight. The air carried a heavy silence between bursts of noise, and the sky, often gray and low, hung like a weight over the soldiers who waited in the frost-bitten stillness for what might come next. Frost on the skies till by this time, the United States had entered the war only recently, sending its first divisions across the Atlantic to join the exhausted Allied forces. These young Americans, fresh-faced and full of belief, brought with them a wave of energy and determination. Most had never seen Europe before. They had grown up on farms, in steel towns, or on the edges of cities, and now they were stepping into a world unlike anything they had ever known. Though their numbers were still small, their presence was a symbol of renewed hope for France and Britain, who had endured years of loss and hardship. Among the new arrivals was a unit of Americans assigned to a sector near the Argonne Forest, led by a quiet but respected officer named Lieutenant Franklin Maddox. The group had quickly found themselves caught in the unforgiving rhythm of trench warfare. Alongside him was Corporal Isaac Moreno, a thoughtful, mechanically minded soldier with a calm presence under pressure. Private Elijah Mason, who rarely spoke but often wrote in his small journal, and Private Benoit Lafleur, a French-American with a sharp ear for languages, made up part of the core group. They, like many others, came into the war believing they would make a difference, but in a matter of weeks, their world turned upside down. The morning had started with a sharp bite in the air, and a heavy mist that rolled low over the trenches near the Argonne Forest. Lieutenant Franklin Maddox stood quietly, checking his watch and glancing at the gray sky above. Around him, a small team of American soldiers moved with careful discipline, their breath rising in cold clouds. They were deep in enemy territory now, and every sound, every movement had to be weighed with caution. The objective was clear: move in under cover of fog, find the German communication cables believed to be hidden near a supply route, and sabotage them without drawing attention. It was a job for a small, skilled unit, and Maddox had been chosen to lead it. Corporal Isaac Moreno crouched nearby, reviewing the map one last time before folding it carefully and slipping it into his coat. He was calm, as always, his mind already thinking several steps ahead. Alongside him was Private Elijah Mason, eyes scanning the forest edge as he quietly held a small leather-bound journal close to his chest before tucking it securely into his inner pocket. Mason rarely spoke unless asked, but he noticed everything and recorded it with quiet devotion. There was also Benoit Lafleur, sharp and focused, who kept his ear tuned to any distant sound that might suggest movement. Private Jonathan Styx McCrae, the youngest among them, tried to keep up with the pace, his nerves visible despite his effort to appear composed. They moved quickly but carefully, weaving through shell-cratered earth and the remnants of shattered trees. As they approached the target zone, the fog began to thin. Maddox signaled for silence and dropped to a crouch, pointing toward a narrow ridge, where the German lines were rumored to stretch through the forest. They reached the edge of the ridge, and Moreno spotted the cables half buried and carefully camouflaged. He set down his small pack and pulled out the tools they'd need. Everything was going according to plan, until the ground shook. The Americans froze. A sudden roar filled the air as an unexpected artillery barrage tore through the forest behind them. Maddox's head snapped toward the direction of the blasts. That wasn't part of the operation. Someone back at the main line had misread the timing. The shells were falling far too close and their narrow window had just been slammed shut. Before they could retreat, Moreno spotted movement on the left flank, figures emerging from behind a shattered grove. German patrols. 2, maybe 3 squads. Maddox signaled for cover, and the team scrambled to nearby ditches, hearts pounding. The fog, once their ally, was now lifting, revealing their position. They tried to hold, hoping the barrage might confuse the enemy, or at least buy time, but it only brought more chaos. Dirt rained down as the forest was torn apart behind them, and the ground trembled under each impact. The Americans returned fire, trying to push through a gap in the line, but it was too late. The Germans were closing in fast from all sides, methodical and well-coordinated. Pinned down and with no escape route left, Maddox faced the hardest choice of his life. His men were running low on supplies, and one by one, their options disappeared. McRae, hit by the fall of debris, had to be helped to his feet. Mason stayed close to him, shielding the boy as best he could. Moreno looked to Maddox with a steady gaze, not panic, just waiting for the final call. Please. With a heavy heart, Maddox raised his hands slowly and stepped out from cover. The others followed, their faces tense and eyes full of disbelief. The Germans closed in and surrounded them, shouting commands and ordering them to drop their gear. As they were searched, Mason gently pressed his coat shut, hiding the small journal inside as if it were the last piece of himself he could keep. The walk to the rear lines was silent. No one spoke. No one could. The shame sat heavy on their shoulders. Some stared at the ground, others straight ahead, refusing to look at one another. For soldiers raised to fight with honor and return home proud, this was not a path they had ever imagined. Being captured didn't just mean losing a battle, it meant stepping into the unknown, into a place where time might stretch endlessly and hope could quietly disappear. Later, as they were loaded into covered trucks and driven away from the forest, Maddox sat between Moreno and LaFleur, watching the trees blur past. His thoughts ran in circles. He questioned every step they had taken. Had he pushed too far? Had he read the timing wrong? Had he failed them all? Moreno finally broke the silence, his voice low and calm, saying, "We did what we could, sir." Maddox gave a quiet nod but said nothing. He couldn't speak. Not yet. In the back of the truck, Mason clutched the journal under his coat, his fingers trembling just slightly. He didn't know why he'd felt the need to write everything down, but now, more than ever, he knew it mattered. If nothing else, their story needed to be remembered, even if the world forgot their names. The camp they arrived in wasn't built to hold so many men, yet it held them all the same. Wooden barracks stood shoulder to shoulder inside the barbed wire perimeter, weather-beaten and crooked, barely offering protection from the freezing wind that swept across the open yard. The ground was always wet, mud mixed with ash from the low-burning fires. The prisoners were allowed in the mornings and evenings, more for the illusion of warmth than real comfort. Everything smelled of damp wood, old clothing and slow decay. Lager V, as the guards called it, was a place forgotten by the world and designed to make its inhabitants feel the same. Each barrack was packed beyond its limit. Dozens of men shared narrow cots, laid out side by side like books on a shelf, with little room to move. Meals came twice a day, if they came at all. Thin soup in the mornings, stale bread or boiled turnips at night. Hunger was a constant companion, gnawing at their strength day after day. Most of the men had long stopped talking about food. Now they only talked about time, how long they'd been there, how long others had lasted, how long they could endure. The guards patrolled the camp with little expression, but there was one in particular who stood out, Sergeant Vogel. He was broad-shouldered, sharp-eyed, and never spoke more than he needed to. His presence alone was enough to silence the yard. He kept a short cane in his hand, and a list in his mind. He remembered faces, especially those who stepped out of line. He didn't need to raise his voice. A glance from Vogel was enough to stop laughter or freeze a whispered conversation. The men called him the Watchman, though never to his face. Inside this cold order, Maddox's group tried to survive. Lieutenant Franklin Maddox had not let go of the responsibilities he carried before the capture. Though no longer giving orders, he remained the quiet center of the group. He studied the guards' routines, counted their footsteps, memorized which officer patrolled at which hour. At night, when others lay restless in the dark, Maddox spoke softly with the few men he still trusted, always thinking, always weighing chances. Corporal Isaac Moreno had found his purpose again. Though there were no machines to fix, his mind remained sharp, and his eyes were always searching. He noticed cracks in walls, odd sounds beneath floorboards, shifts in air that didn't make sense. If there was a way out, even the smallest weakness, Moreno believed he could find it. He took to working in the camp supply shed, volunteering for odd jobs, just to study the layout of nearby structures. His hands never stopped moving, fixing, tinkering, quietly testing. Private Benoit Lafleur had quickly proven invaluable. Being fluent in both French and German, he understood far more than he let on. He often listened in silence as guards exchanged words, pretending not to notice. What he picked up in those moments: changes in orders, mentions of other camps, shifts in supply lines. He relayed to Maddox in the evenings. His mind worked like a translator and a puzzle solver all in one, breaking coded messages and rebuilding plans from scraps of overheard talk. Then there was Jonathan "Sticks" McCrae, the youngest of the group. Before the war, he'd played the violin at a small dance hall in Kentucky. Now he had nothing but his voice and a few memorized songs. Somehow, in the middle of all that misery, Sticks became the heartbeat of the barrack. He told stories with wild hand gestures and terrible impressions, made up songs about Vogel that only they understood, and found humor in the smallest details. He was the only one who could make Moreno smirk and get Mason to chuckle. For a few minutes each night, when Sticks started to sing or spin a tale, the barrack felt just a little less like a cage. But the weight never really lifted. Men who had arrived with hope slowly turned inward. Some stared at the walls for hours. Others scratched marks into wood or stone to count the days. Rumors swirled constantly. Whispers about failed escapes, about tunnels that collapsed, or men who had tried to run during snowstorms and were never seen again. The strongest rumor of all was that 2 British prisoners had dug a passage beneath the eastern wall a year before, only to be captured and marched back into camp. No one saw them after that. Some said they'd been moved, others said they hadn't. The guards never confirmed anything, but their behavior changed whenever someone got too curious. One Frenchman, who had been asking too many questions, was moved to solitary and never returned. After that, the prisoners knew better than to ask out loud. But still, there were glances, questions shared in code. Moreno began dropping tools near odd spots, listening for hollow sounds. Maddox asked LaFleur to translate old signs scratched into beams. Mason started drawing in his journal again. Not just people or places, but layouts, patterns, things he'd memorized without even realizing. Each night, as the camp lights dimmed and the prisoners lay in silence, Maddox would close his eyes and picture it: a way out, a line beneath the walls, a tunnel, a chance. It was nothing more than a whisper then, but it carried in the wind, under the wooden floors and between the bunk beds. A whisper that said, "Not yet, not done." And so, the men waited, watched, listened. Beneath the routine of despair, something else was forming, something hidden, something alive. The winter morning had started like any other, bitter, gray and heavy with silence. A light snowfall dusted the yard, covering the muddy ground like a thin sheet that fooled no one. Moreno had been assigned punishment duty that day for supposedly tampering with one of the camp's hinges. Vogel never said a word when he pointed to the task, just motioned toward a frost-covered storage area near the far edge of the camp. The old root cellar, the prisoners called the pit. Most of the newer prisoners avoided it. It sat partially sunken into the earth behind the barracks, its stone entrance crumbling and its wooden doors sagging under years of neglect. It hadn't been used in months. Moreno kept his head low as he worked, clearing debris from around the broken door and stacking firewood like he'd been told. But as he bent down near the edge of the structure, something strange caught his eye. A patch of frost along the stone wall melted faster than the rest, as if the ground beneath it were warmer than the surrounding area. He tapped it with his boot. The sound it gave back was different. Not solid like frozen earth, but faint, almost hollow. Heart racing just a little, he dropped to his knees and brushed the snow away with his sleeve. Beneath the frost was old timber, cracked and weathered, and right at the center was a small square panel set into the earth. That night, once the camp fell quiet and most of the guards had retreated to the inner post, Moreno whispered the discovery to Maddox in the shadows of the barrack. LaFleur and Mason listened closely, their faces half lit by the dim lantern flame. Sticks kept hidden behind a crate. Maddox didn't hesitate. If Moreno was right, if there truly was something beneath that rotting wood, then they needed to see it for themselves. For the next 3 nights, under the cover of darkness and muffled snow, Moreno, Maddox and LaFleur took turns slipping away. They moved only when Vogel wasn't on the yard, using short breaks and pretense of night duty as cover. Moreno brought a spoon he'd reshaped into a narrow trowel. Mason smuggled a length of wire from the radio scraps he'd once repaired. Even Sticks played a role, keeping watch from inside the barrack window and softly tapping rhythms against the frame to signal approaching guards. On the fourth night, beneath a hard-packed layer of dirt and rotted leaves, they finally pried the old wood loose. The shaft below was narrow, and the air that rose from it smelled of cold earth and stale silence. Maddox lowered a torch, just a rag soaked in oil, wrapped around a stick. The light flickered across stone walls and revealed what they had only dared to hope, a tunnel. Its entrance was rough and uneven, just tall enough for a man to crawl through on hands and knees. The first few feet were intact, but further in the passage appeared sagged and unstable. Lafleur examined the markings on the inner stones and shook his head. "French," he said softly, tracing a faint name scratched into the side. "This was built by prisoners like us, years ago, maybe more." "It didn't work for them," Moreno muttered, eyeing the partial collapse. "Or maybe it almost did," Maddox answered. "Either way, they left us something we might finish." From that moment the tunnel became their purpose. Each night, in shifts of 2, the group returned to the pit. Maddox mapped the route, marking weak points and measuring their progress by the width of his palm. Moreno reinforced the walls with scrap wood, using bits of shelving and broken bed frames when he could. Lafleur listened closely in the yard for new orders, shifts in guard schedules or loose talk that could betray their movement. Mason, ever quiet, kept writing, noting every detail in his journal and sketching the layout in careful lines. They worked in silence, often chilled to the bone, their clothes soaked with sweat beneath their coats. There were moments when the tunnel groaned beneath its own weight, where the air thinned and the earth above seemed ready to fall. Still they pressed forward. Every shovelful of dirt was packed into sacks hidden under bunks or scattered across the yard during chores. Every scrap of wood or metal was repurposed. No one outside the circle knew, and none of them spoke about it beyond whispered exchanges at night. The risk was enormous. If they were caught, not just near the tunnel, but even suspected of planning, the consequences would be final. Yet something in the tunnel gave them more than fear. It gave them direction. For men who had lived day by day in a fog of routine and hopelessness, it was the first time in months they'd felt in control of their fate. As the tunnel stretched further beneath the yard, reaching toward the edge of the camp's perimeter, Maddox made a quiet decision. They wouldn't tell anyone else. Not yet. Not until it was done, reinforced, and ready. It was too fragile, too dangerous to risk by speaking of it too soon. He promised himself that when the day came, no one they trusted would be left behind. And so, night after night, with frost in their breath and silence in their footsteps, they dug, beneath the mud and misery, beneath the shadow of guards and wire. They carved a narrow path of hope. A tunnel long forgotten by others was now reborn, and with it the first real thought that maybe, just maybe, they could escape. The tunnel was only part of it. Digging into the frozen ground had given the group hope, but hope alone wouldn't get them past the German perimeter or the long stretch of forest beyond. Escape wasn't just about getting out, it was about staying out. That's where the real planning began. Lieutenant Maddox knew this would take more than determination. It would take precision, timing and trust, each harder to come by than the last. He gathered the original 4, Moreno, Lafleur, Sticks, and Mason, inside the back of the barracks one night, and laid out the challenge. "We're not crawling through a tunnel just to freeze in the woods," he said, his voice low but steady. "We need to know where we're going, what lies beyond the fence, and how long we'll have between patrols. One wrong move, and we're back in shackles, or worse." Accomplice Moreno was already working on their first tool, a makeshift compass. He'd taken the needle from an old gramophone used in the German officers' lounge and magnetized it using the friction of metal on stone. Set inside the bottom of a wooden bowl filled with water, the needle pointed north with just enough accuracy to guide them once they reached open ground. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than nothing. Lafleur had managed to steal a partial map from the camp office while delivering firewood. It only showed the immediate surroundings, a few roads and forest lines, but it was enough to guess where the rail lines ran. Based on overheard conversations between guards, he pieced together that the nearest village lay southwest, maybe 2 days' walk. The map was smuggled out under his coat lining and copied onto a torn sheet of blanket using charcoal and Mason's ink. But the most difficult part was timing the German patrols. That job fell to Lafleur and Mason. Each day Lafleur paid close attention while cleaning outside the officers' mess, listening to the guards talk when they thought no one understood. His fluency in German let him catch small but important clues, changes in shift times, a new route being considered, or rumors of winter reinforcements. Every word mattered. Mason documented it all in his hidden journal, turning whispered fragments into patterns and timetables. Over the weeks, the team slowly mapped out the guard rotations, when they walked the yard, when the outer towers dimmed for the night, and when the officer quarters fell silent. The plan, they decided, would require at least 15 minutes of uninterrupted darkness once the tunnel broke through. That would give them a narrow window to clear the outer fence and disappear into the woods. But they couldn't do it alone, not anymore. If the tunnel held, they could move at least 8 men through it, maybe 10 if staggered. Maddox chose to involve a small number of others, those he trusted most, regardless of nationality. 2 British prisoners, Sergeant Albie Carver and Private Thomas Howden, had proven steady and quiet over months of imprisonment. From the French side, there was Marcel Duray, a carpenter before the war with steady hands and sharp eyes. They spoke in code, often using Styx McRae's songs as a cover. Styx had started playing soft rhythms against the wall each night, tapping melodies that signaled meetings, plans, or warnings. He made it look like a distraction, something harmless to keep spirits up. In reality, every beat had meaning. 2 taps followed by 1 meant a safe meeting. 3 short taps warned of a guard nearby. No one outside the core group ever suspected a thing. Still, even with secrecy, there was unease. Small things began to happen. Odd changes in guard behavior, increased checks of the barracks, and once, a surprise inspection that nearly revealed a hidden tool. Maddox started to suspect someone had been talking. Perhaps not directly, but someone may have mentioned too much to the wrong person, or let curiosity overtake caution. Moreno brought it up first one night. We patched the tunnel, smuggle tools, risk everything, and now someone might be whispering into Vogel's ear. His voice was tight with frustration, his hands clenched from hours of digging. We don't know that, Maddox replied calmly, though his eyes showed the same worry. But something's off. Styx leaned in from the shadows. Could be someone outside our circle. Maybe they saw the shifts. Maybe they think they're protecting themselves by dropping hints. That possibility struck a nerve. In a camp built on desperation, survival often overpowered loyalty. Maddox decided to test their circle. He instructed LaFleur to mention, in passing, that they'd be testing a false trail on the eastern fence soon. Nothing serious, just a bit of misdirection. If word got out and the eastern side suddenly became heavily guarded, they'd know someone was talking. 3 nights later, German guards were posted near the eastern fence for the first time in weeks. That confirmed it. Someone had been listening, someone close enough to pick up even a vague mention. But who? The group narrowed the suspects to 2 men outside the main team, prisoners who had once worked in the kitchens and had recently been reassigned. Maddox decided not to confront them, not yet. Instead, the group tightened their communication. They moved the tunnel work to deeper hours of the night, changed watch signals, and stopped sharing information beyond those absolutely necessary. Trust was now their rarest currency. Despite the tension, progress continued. The tunnel was nearly at the edge of the yard. The air within it had grown colder and thinner, but they had reinforced its walls and laid down scraps of cloth to muffle crawling. Every man involved knew the plan by heart: where to meet, when to move, what signals to listen for. Mason kept track of it all in his hidden journal, which he now wore on a cord around his neck, hidden beneath his shirt. As the full moon approached, the night chosen for the escape, they made their final preparations. Small rations were collected. Warm clothing was patched together from stolen coats and wool scraps. The compass was tested and tested again. Each man was ready, or at least as ready as anyone could be when gambling their life on a hole in the ground, and a map drawn in charcoal. And still they couldn't shake the feeling that someone knew more than they should. The tunnel was their way out, their only hope. But deep down they all knew that if the wrong person whispered the right thing at the wrong moment, their entire plan could fall apart. Even so, they pressed forward, because in the face of endless winter, tight rations, and barbed wire, they had something stronger than fear: purpose, and that purpose was freedom. The frost came early that week, thick and heavy across the ground, muffling footsteps and cloaking the camp in a tense silence. By now the tunnel was within a few feet of the perimeter wall, and every night brought them closer to the edge of their daring escape. But just as the finish line seemed near, trouble arrived on 4 legs and with a sharp nose. The German guards had started bringing in a dog, an old shepherd named Bruno, known among the prisoners for his loyalty and sharp instincts. One cold morning, as prisoners filed out for roll call, Bruno broke from his leash and darted toward the side yard. He sniffed aggressively near the old root cellar, the same one that hid the tunnel's entrance. His handler tugged hard on the leash trying to pull him away, but the dog circled twice more, his snout pushing into the earth. From across the yard, Maddox's heart froze. Moreno, who had just stepped out of the latrine, locked eyes with him. Neither moved, but the message passed between them instantly. The tunnel was in danger. Bruno didn't bark, and thankfully the handler seemed uninterested in the dog's fixation. After a few tense minutes, they were called away, but the damage was done. For the next 2 nights, no one dared approach the tunnel. The group rotated their meeting spots, doubled back through different routes, and kept their tools hidden. If the guards had any idea something was buried there, they showed no signs, but Maddox knew they couldn't take another scare like that. That same week, a new prisoner arrived. Staff Sergeant Walter Eberle, an American infantryman from the 32nd Division. Eberle had the look of someone who'd seen too much hollow cheeks, a limp on his left leg, and a quiet way of moving that made others take notice. From the moment he entered the barracks, he was polite, helpful, and oddly observant. Too observant, in fact. Within days, he had begun asking small questions. Who bunked where? What shifts the guards took? Which guards were more lenient than others? At first it came off as nervous curiosity, the sort you'd expect from a man adjusting to captivity. But then he started lingering near the tunnel entrance. Once, Moreno caught him near the cellar, pretending to tie a bootlace that didn't need tying. LaFleur noticed it too, how Eberle watched the guard towers during evening roll call a little too closely, as if memorizing something. The final straw came when one of their smuggled tools, a spoon carved into a digging blade, went missing. It had been tucked in a false compartment beneath Moreno's bunk, and only a few people even knew it existed. Now it was gone, and no one had a good explanation. Suspicion grew quickly. In a war filled with shifting loyalties and desperate choices, the idea of a German plant wasn't far-fetched. Maddox called a secret meeting that night, gathering only the core group. The cold wind crept through the cracks in the barracks as they huddled in the corner near the stove, voices low. "I say we shut everything down," Moreno insisted, his voice shaking with restrained anger. "One mistake now and the whole camp will be crawling with guards." LaFleur nodded grimly. "This new guy, Eberle, he's either too eager or too good at pretending." Maddox didn't speak right away. He watched the shadows move across the floor, his mind racing through possibilities. "We can't afford a false accusation," he finally said, "but we can't ignore this either." So he decided to confront Eberle himself. That evening after roll call, Maddox waited by the water pump outside the barracks. When Eberle passed, Maddox stepped forward, gesturing casually. "You got a moment?" Eberle nodded, and together they walked toward the back wall of the yard, away from the lanterns. The air was thick with silence. "I'll be straight with you," Maddox said, keeping his voice steady. "You're asking too many questions, getting too close to things you shouldn't know about." Eberle didn't flinch. He stared into the darkness for a long moment before answering. "So that's it, huh? You think I'm one of them? I think you're either trying to help or trying to hurt us, and I can't risk not knowing which." There was a pause. Eberle let out a quiet breath, almost a laugh, but it didn't carry any humor. "I wasn't always like this," he said. "Last camp I was in, 3 months ago, we had a plan, not as good as yours, but it had promise. 8 of us worked on it. I got caught smuggling a piece of wire, just wire, that's all. They took me out of my cell for 3 days. When I came back, only 3 of the original 8 were still there." Maddox listened, uncertain where the story was heading. "They made me give up names," Eberle continued, his voice raw now. "I didn't want to, but they didn't stop until I did. And when I finally cracked, I watched the fallout from a window. I never saw those men again." He rubbed his palms together, not from the cold but from something deeper, something he couldn't shake. "When I got transferred here, I made a choice. I'd earn my way back, if it meant helping someone else succeed where I failed. So yeah, I ask questions, because I want to make it right." Maddox studied him in silence. There was no anger in Eberle's face, only shame and something that looked a lot like determination. It wasn't the first time Maddox had seen that look. War-aged men in different ways. "We don't forgive easily here," Maddox finally said, "but we don't turn away courage either. If you're serious, we'll watch, and if you lie to us again, we'll bury this tunnel ourselves before you get another chance." Eberle nodded. "Fair enough. The next morning, the missing tool mysteriously reappeared. Moreno found it under a pile of laundry in the washing basin, cleaned and wrapped in cloth. No one ever admitted to moving it. But after that, Eberly kept his distance until invited back in, and when he brought with him a knowledge of guard habits that turned out to be useful. Still, the damage lingered. Trust was thinner now, stretched tight like the wire fences that boxed them in. Every step toward freedom felt heavier, but with each close call survived, the plan became more real, the dream more vivid. The tunnel was ready. The team was tighter, warier, but stronger. What came next would decide everything, and there was no turning back. It came without warning, thick, gray clouds rolling in from the north, swallowing the sky like smoke over a battlefield. By late afternoon, the wind howled through the trees beyond the camp fence, bending the limbs like they were reaching for something just out of reach. Snow followed soon after, first a dusting, then a blinding torrent that swept across the German camp with punishing force. Tents flapped violently. Guards retreated into their posts, pulling coats tighter around their shoulders. Power flickered once, then cut out completely, leaving the entire camp in shadow. Inside the barracks, silence fell. The only sounds were the whistle of wind outside, and the creaking of wooden beams under the weight of the storm. The single kerosene lamp sputtered near the stove, casting long shadows that danced across the cold wooden floor. Lieutenant Maddox stood near the window, eyes scanning the yard through the frosted glass. Snow whipped across the open ground, cutting visibility down to a few yards. The guard tower lights were out, their silhouettes barely visible in the whiteout. No shouting, no barking, no footsteps, just wind and snow. He turned slowly to face the others. Moreno, Eberly, Lafleur, McCrae, and a handful of others were gathered around the stove, huddled under coats and blankets. "This is it," Maddox said quietly. "We'll never get another chance like this." A murmur rose among them. Moreno's face tensed with realization. The guards can't see. Their rotations will be delayed. It's now or never. Eberly nodded, already reaching under his cot for the final bundle of maps and supplies. "We can slip out one at a time. The wind will cover our sound." But not everyone was ready. "I don't know," Lafleur said suddenly, his voice tight, strained. He stood, pacing in small circles. "The tunnel's still fragile. What if it gives out halfway through? What if it collapses on us?" Moreno stepped toward him. "We've reinforced the walls with wood from the old storage crates. You helped me do it." "But it's wet now," Lafleur said, rubbing his hands together. "The storm, what if it's soaked through? What if it caves in?" Maddox walked over slowly. "There's risk, yes, but we've prepared for this. The storm is our cover. If we wait, they'll fix the lights, the patrols will tighten, and we'll lose everything we've built." Still, Lafleur didn't move. His breath came in short bursts, eyes darting to the door and then to the floor. He wasn't just nervous, he was breaking. Moreno stepped forward again, but this time he didn't argue. He spoke softer now, the way you'd talk to a friend in pain. "You remember what I told you about my father?" Moreno said, voice low, eyes fixed on Lafleur's. "He was a miner back in New Mexico, worked underground most of his life. One winter the shaft he was in collapsed during a storm. Everyone thought he was gone, but he told me later, it wasn't the collapse that scared him. It was the silence, the waiting, not knowing if anyone was coming. So he dug with his bare hands, said he wasn't about to just sit and let fear finish the job." Lafleur's breathing slowed. He looked up, meeting Moreno's gaze. "I know what it's like," Moreno continued, "that tightness in your chest, the doubt in your gut. But that tunnel, that's our way out. And we dug it together. We're not leaving you behind." There was a long pause, then finally Lafleur nodded. "I'm with you." Maddox gave Moreno a brief nod of thanks before moving to the others. "We go in pairs, 10-minute intervals. Don't take anything unnecessary. Just your pack, your coat, and your will to keep moving." They moved quickly, but quietly. The barracks emptied two at a time, the wind outside swallowing their footsteps, as they slipped behind the latrine shed and toward the cellar. The entrance to the tunnel was covered by a loose board, now half buried in snow. Bruno and Eberly pulled it free, revealing the narrow shaft beneath. One by one, the men climbed down, flashlights wrapped in cloth to dim the beam. Inside, the tunnel felt smaller than ever. The storm above rattled the earth and snow leaked through the ceiling in tiny droplets, making the wooden beams groan. They crawled on elbows and knees, inching forward through the dim passage. Every creak in the wood made them hold their breath. Every shift in the dirt sounded like doom. But they pressed on. Maddox was the last to enter, pulling the board back over the entrance before disappearing into the earth. The storm raged on above them, but in the tunnel it was the sound of heartbeats and hope that carried them forward. No one spoke. There was no need. They all understood what was at stake. If they made it through the tunnel, they would be free men. If not, this storm would be their grave. But no one stopped crawling, because tonight, wrapped in cold fear and silence, they were chasing something bigger than safety. They were chasing a future, and that was worth the storm. The moment loaded Maddox slipped beneath the loose board and into the narrow shaft, the world above fell away entirely. Darkness wrapped around him like a thick blanket, broken only by the faint glow of a small flashlight, its beam muffled by a thin cloth to keep it from drawing unwanted attention. One by one the others followed, disappearing into the cold, damp earth with nothing but whispered words and careful movements guiding them forward. The tunnel was tighter than any of them had imagined. It pressed in from every side, the low ceiling forcing them to crawl on hands and knees through the slick dirt. The cold was a constant presence, seeping through their clothes, chilling their bone. Water dripped from the ceiling, landing on their backs and pooling in shallow puddles along the uneven floor. Each breath they took was heavy and slow, the air thick with the smell of earth and old wood. Corporal Moreno led the way, his hands steady despite the darkness and discomfort. Every inch gained was a victory, every foot forward a step closer to freedom. But the tunnel was unforgiving. At one point Moreno's knee caught on a sharp rock, hidden in the mud. A sudden jolt went through his leg, and a sharp wince escaped his lips. "Moreno?" Maddox whispered urgently, halting his crawl. Moreno tried to move again, but pain clenched his leg, making each motion a struggle. "I think I twisted something," he admitted quietly. "I can't move fast." The group behind them slowed instinctively, concern replacing the quiet determination that had driven them so far. Private McCrae, the musician turned morale booster, was the first to reach Moreno's side. Without hesitation, McCrae shifted his pack, making space to support Moreno's injured leg. "We're not leaving you," McCrae said firmly, his voice steady in the dark. "We move slower, together. No one gets left behind." The others adjusted their pace, muscles tensing with every slow crawl. The tunnel seemed to close in tighter, as if the earth itself was trying to trap them. Cold water seeped deeper, soaking their clothes and making the slippery ground even more treacherous. Time lost meaning as they inched forward. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Every sound, a creak of wood, a small shift of dirt, made hearts pound faster. The fear of discovery was a shadow just behind their minds, constant and unrelenting. Suddenly there was a sharp crack that echoed through the tunnel, a sound that sent a wave of panic crashing through the group. Behind them, the wall of earth and old timber groaned, and then gave way. A section of the tunnel collapsed, dirt and debris filling the narrow passage where they had just passed. Maddox cursed under his breath. "There's no turning back now," he said, voice tight with urgency. Moreno looked back, the weight of their situation pressing down on him harder than the earth above. "We're trapped beneath the ground with only one way out." The realization settled like a stone in everyone's stomach. The tunnel behind them was blocked. If the guards discovered the collapse, the noise could draw them close, and escape would become impossible. They had to move forward, no matter what waited ahead. The passage narrowed again, forcing them into a single file. The flashlight's glow barely reached past Moreno's back as he moved slowly, the pain in his leg a constant reminder of the risk they were taking. When they finally reached the end of the tunnel, a faint scent of cold air greeted them, fresh and sharp compared to the stale earth they had been breathing for hours. Maddox carefully pushed aside the final board, revealing a small hole just beyond the camp's outer fence. For a moment, the men paused, staring into the night. Snow was still falling heavily, the storm a muffled roar behind them. The world was quiet but full of danger. They had made it out of the earth, but they were far from safe. Just beyond the fence was a German patrol station, its lanterns casting a dim glow over the snow-covered ground. A pair of soldiers moved back and forth, their shadows long and threatening in the cold light. One careless step, one wrong breath, and their escape would end right here. Maddox looked back at his men, eyes dark but steady. "We move carefully. No noise, we wait for the patrol to pass." LaFleur, still pale from the long crawl and storm, nodded. "We've come too far to be caught now." McCrae adjusted his pack, gripping Moreno's arm to help steady him. "Let's finish this." Slowly, almost soundless, the group slipped through the narrow opening. Each step on the snow was measured and careful. The patrol's boots crunched faintly, but the wind and storm covered the sound like a curtain. The men hugged the shadows, hearts pounding louder than their footsteps. Every breath felt like a risk. As they passed the patrol station, Maddox held up a finger, signaling to freeze. The guards stopped, speaking quietly in German, unaware of how close they were to losing their prisoners. The storm masked their voices, and the soft shuffling of the escapees moving behind the fence line. Once the patrol moved on, the men hurried silently across the open field, the cold biting into their faces but the hope burning fiercely in their chests. The darkness and snow were their allies now. They were out of the camp, but freedom was still a long, uncertain path away. The bitter cold pressed against their faces as the group slipped silently into the dense forest beyond the camp's perimeter. The snow lay thick and heavy on the branches, turning the landscape into a white maze that both shielded and challenged them. Every crunch of footsteps beneath the fresh powder felt loud in the stillness, every breath a visible puff in the frozen air. Lieutenant Maddox led the way, clutching a fragile makeshift compass that Moreno had carefully crafted from the needle of a broken gramophone. It wasn't much, but it was enough to point them steadily westward, the direction of the Allied lines in a hope of safety. Behind him, Lafleur scanned the trees, his sharp eyes alert for any sign of danger. McCrae stayed close to Moreno, lending support to the injured corporal as they moved forward in slow but determined strides. The forest seemed endless, a cold, silent world where shadows stretched long and uncertain. Each man was wrapped in his own thoughts, fears mingling with the urgent drive to escape. The freedom they had risked so much to reach now felt fragile, as if the winter itself might swallow them whole. But they were not alone. Somewhere behind them, the faint sounds of German boots crunching through the snow began to grow louder. The patrols had spotted signs of their escape: footprints, broken branches, a hastily abandoned trail. The quiet forest was no longer a refuge. It had become a hunting ground. The group's pace quickened, hearts pounding as the threat closed in. Maddox whispered orders, urging everyone to keep moving, but to stay low, to hide whenever possible among the trees. The snow muffled some sounds, but it also made every step more visible. They were running out of time. In the distance, the sharp crack of a rifle shattered the cold air. The sound echoed like a warning, sharp and cruel. The men froze for a moment, every muscle tense with fear. Maddox glanced back to see Staff Sergeant Walter Aberley stepping away from the group, pulling on a stolen German uniform that had been hidden among their few supplies. "Aberley?" Maddox called quietly, confusion and worry mixing in his voice. Aberley looked back with steady eyes. "I have to do this," he said simply. "I'll draw them away. You need to keep moving." Lafleur shook his head, his voice tight with emotion. "You can't. It's too dangerous." Eberle's face was set with quiet resolve. "I owe you all that much. Let me buy you some time." With a final nod, Aberley disappeared into the trees, blending into the enemy's colors. Maddox and the others watched helplessly as the distance between them grew. The forest was suddenly alive with noise, shouts in German, the heavy steps of pursuit, and then more gunfire. Maddox's heart clenched as he heard the sharp pops of rifles cutting through the snow-covered woods. He knew those shots were for Eberle, a sacrifice they could neither repay nor forget. "We have to keep moving," Maddox urged, swallowing the lump in his throat. "For Eberle, for all of us." The group pressed on, the cold biting deeper and the snow growing heavier with each step. The trail was dangerous, but they stayed focused on the compass and the hope that the Allies were not far away. Every tree they passed, every hill they climbed was a step closer to safety, or so they prayed. Moreno's leg throbbed, slowing them at times, but the determination in the group never wavered. McCrae never left his side, offering quiet encouragement in steady hands. Lafleur's knowledge of the land and language kept them alert and cautious, translating muffled sounds and predicting patrol movements. The men were exhausted, their faces streaked with frost and weariness, but their spirit held strong, forged by the hope of freedom and the memory of the tunnel that had given them a chance. As night began to fall, they finally glimpsed the faint glow of campfires in the distance. Signs of Allied troops. Relief surged through them, but Maddox warned against celebration. "We're not safe yet. Stay sharp." With one last push through the dark woods, the group broke into a clearing where the welcoming lights awaited. The forest grip loosened, and the nightmare of the chase began to fade. Behind them, the echoes of gunshots and ever-loose sacrifice lingered, a haunting reminder of the price of freedom. But they had made it. For now, at least, they were free men. After what felt like an endless journey through the snow-covered forest, the group finally reached the edge of the clearing near St. Mihiel. The faint flicker of lanterns and the low murmur of voices marked the presence of a British outpost. Maddox's heart beat faster. This was the moment they had risked everything for, their chance to escape the nightmare of the prison camp and find safety among their allies. But even in relief, danger was still close. As they stepped into the light, a sudden shout cut through the night air, followed by the sharp clatter of rifles being raised. The exhausted men froze, their breaths catching in their throats. They had been mistaken for enemy soldiers. Maddox raised his hand slowly, shouting, "We're Americans. Prisoners escaped from the German camp." His voice was urgent but calm, hoping the British troops would hear the truth before pulling the trigger. Seconds stretched painfully. Then, a British officer rushed forward, signaling the guards to lower their weapons. "Hold your fire. These men are with us," he ordered. Relief flooded through Maddox and the others, but their ordeal was far from over. Medical teams quickly surrounded them. Moreno was helped to a stretcher, his leg badly injured during the tunnel escape and the chase. The medic spoke in quiet tones, concerned the damage might be serious enough to require amputation. Moreno, who had never complained once during their escape, now faced the terrifying possibility of losing his leg. Yet he kept a brave face, knowing his comrades needed him to stay strong. McCrae too was in urgent need of care. His fingers and toes were stiff and pale from frostbite, and the medics moved swiftly to warm and treat him. Even in his weakened state, McCrae's spirit shone through. He whispered encouragement to Moreno, reminding him they had come too far to give up now. Meanwhile, Private Elijah Mason's journal drew the attention of a British intelligence officer. The worn leather book had been carefully hidden throughout the escape, its pages filled with coded notes and detailed sketches of the prison camp and surrounding areas. The officer studied the journal closely, recognizing the valuable information it contained, details that could help Allied forces plan future operations and better understand enemy defenses. Maddox watched as the officer flipped through the pages with growing interest. "This could change things," the officer said quietly. "Your bravery doesn't just save yourselves, it might save many others." The men exchanged tired but hopeful glances. Their escape was not just a fight for freedom, it was part of a larger struggle, one that their courage and sacrifice had touched deeply. As the medical teams worked and the outpost buzzed with activity, Maddox thought back to the long months in the camp, the cold, the fear, the endless planning, and the moments when hope seemed lost. Now, standing here on friendly ground, he realized that those hardships had forged something stronger than captivity, a bond of trust and determination that could not be broken. The night air was still cold, but the warmth of safety began to thaw the chill in their bones. Their journey was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, they could believe in a future beyond the walls of the prison camp. And that future was worth every risk they had taken. If you're a proud American who honors our war heroes, hit that subscribe button for more incredible stories of courage and sacrifice.